Welcome to all you grade 12 life science students. So now we're doing the nervous system with Aslam. I am Luni. How are you doing, Aslam?
I'm great, Luni. What's happening? What's happening here? I
Oh,
see
man.
you doing some exciting stuff
Yo,
before
it was
this.
crazy, but we had fun. So are you going to give us some fun today?
Yeah, always.
All right.
Always.
So guys, don't forget to hit us up on Twitter at Learn Extra, on Facebook, on facebook.com/Learn Extra. You guys can also check out the show notes, the schedules, and the videos of all the shows on learnextra.co.za/live. So with all that said, I'd like to thank Macmillan for sponsoring our great show, and I'll take it right to Aslam.
Thanks, Luni. Welcome, Mindsetters. I'm hoping you had a relaxed day today. You see, Workers' Day was for you and not for Luni and I. We've got to work today so that you can do well in your exams. And one day, obviously, and in the background, we got our friend James that's taking care of all the technical stuff and obviously telling us what to do on cue. There we go, guys. What we're doing today, and we spoke about it last week, we finished off last week with the plant hormones. We are now dealing with still coordination, still response to the environment, but now we're going to the animals. And the first system that we encounter is the nervous system. There are two systems that are involved in response to environment in the human, and that is the nervous system and the endocrine system, or the chemical coordination system. We are looking at the first of those two, and that is the nervous system. So what are we doing today? First of all, we want to know what is the unit of the nervous system and how does it look? What is its structure? Structure of the neuron. The basic unit of the nervous system is the neuron. Then we want to go and look at the types and structure and functions of the different types of neurons. So not only we want to know what the neuron is and what a general neuron should have, we also want to know how many types do we have and what are their functions. We then go further to say that we want to look at the location and functions of parts of the brain. Which parts of the brain? The cerebrum, the hypothalamus, the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata. Big words, guys, but you're going to get used to it. We also want to look at the structure and functions of the spinal cord. And then, if we look at the spinal cord, then we must also look at what is a reflex arc and what is a reflex action. And finally, we want to look at what a reflex arc does. And we want to look at the significance. Why does it happen? Why do we have this thing called the reflex action in our body? This is what we're looking at today, guys. So get geared up. I'm hoping you've got all your pens, your papers, your little notes, your textbooks, whatever you need to use. Keep it with you. Don't forget, Luni's reminded you of the Facebook page, etc. Please, please, please. The success of our shows depends on your questions coming through. So keep that coming. Now, what I tell my matrics at school is, if they spend so much of time in their work for the year in grade 12 as they spend thinking about their matric farewell, we would all have better results in the country. Unfortunately, when we get to matric, we only focus on this matric ball, matric dinner, and we forget that we got work. Now, what can happen is, if you don't focus on your work, you may end up having 2 or 3 or 4 matric balls, and you don't want that. You don't want every year the people seeing you at the same function. And when you have a matric farewell, then obviously, guys, you have to coordinate the event. You have a committee, people report to that committee, the committee members then will deploy different people. In the New South Africa, we have to use this word deploy, because we're hearing it all the time. We're deploying people this way and that way. So we deploy everybody, different things. They have to feed back to us, and we take action that way. Now, coordination, this is what it's all about. Let's look at this diagram. And this diagram does it very beautifully. This is why we put it up. First of all, we have a receptor in the body that's going to receive the stimulus from outside. That's our first point of entry there. In this case, they're using the eye as a sensory receptor. It's going to receive the stimulus and convert that stimulus. So we're getting a stimulus coming in. and that is converted to an impulse. That's your sensory input, and that will then go to the central nervous system. So you have a control center, you know. So the information goes to the control center. The control center receives the information, and they go through this information. They integrate it into their system, and they interpret it. And they send message out to an effector, still with an impulse coming there, to bring about an action. So you've sensed something, and you have an output. The output is called a response. So here we're having the response. Notice how it happens again. Stimulus, receptor, impulse, central nervous system, effector, and you bring about the response. So you're seeing something beautiful, and you're appreciating it, and maybe because you see that something beautiful, you're going to comment on it. That will be your response to that. Or if you're smelling beautiful food somewhere, and you walk in, then what happens is your mouth waters. Luni, you heard the term mouth waters?
Oh, yes.
What does that really mean, Luni, in our terms?
When like you see something that's tasty or something that you really want, and then you start getting that thing that you craving.
There you go, you're getting a craving for it. And what it actually means is that your salivary glands are secreting saliva. Mouth watering, meaning that the salivary glands in this case are the effectors. Your nasal passage has olfactory cells that sense the smell, and with the tongue, the taste is also there. Smell is a combination of taste and smell at the same time. That goes to the central nervous system. The central nervous system is sensing food. It interprets that as food, and therefore sends a message to the salivary glands to secrete saliva. So the secretion of saliva would then be your response. So basically, for coordination to occur effectively, an organism must receive stimulus, convert that stimulus to an impulse, and send the impulse to a control center, that is a central nervous system in our case, for processing and interpretation, and then respond to the stimulus. Stimulus, impulse, control center, response. Any control, any coordinating system must have these things in place for it to be effective. One example that comes to mind right now is your armed response. Your armed response has a control center where they're waiting. If you put your alarm on, they get the message that your alarm is armed. If in that time somebody moves in the house, or the door is open, or a window is open, the alarm is triggered off. So there was a stimulus, somebody opened the door. Converted to an electrical message that goes to the control center to tell them that in this house, this particular door or this particular window has been opened. And what do? They send armed response to your house. So this is how this whole thing works. Not very different. Good. Let's look at the organization of the nervous system now. The nervous system is made up of, as I mentioned earlier, the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Just those two organs, the brain and the spinal cord. All other nerves in the body that link to the brain and spinal cord make up the peripheral nervous system. This peripheral nervous system is divided further into the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. Notice the words voluntary, involuntary. What do those words mean? The one that says voluntary means that you are in control of that part of your body. For example, I am in control of talking to you right now. I can stop talking. There you go. Now I can start talking again. I can move my hands, voluntary. However, there's certain things in our body that are involuntary. For example, blinking when something is coming to the eye. That's involuntary. Or let's take what Llewellyn was doing earlier in the grade 11s. If the grade 12s weren't watching, Llewellyn was doing a dissection of the digestive system. And he spoke about the esophagus and the stomach, etc. You know when you swallow food, after that food is down the gullet or the esophagus. You are not in control of that food. You cannot, Looney, tell the food, stop at the esophagus. There's too much food in the stomach now. Hold on a little bit. Let's hold the traffic off. You can't do that, yes?
No,
Once
you
it's
can't.
in,
It's in.
out of your control, involuntary, okay? So that is what we mean by involuntary, those things that we can't control. Your heartbeat, for example, you can't control whether it's faster or slower, okay? The autonomic nervous system is then broken out further into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So guys, this is an overview of the entire nervous system. We are going to go into more details in all of these areas as we're going to go along in our journey through the nervous system. As we've been accustomed to now these last few weeks, we said we start with the questions, and the questions are part of the lesson. So the first question says, name the basic unit of the nervous system in humans. And that would be the neuron, as we said in our introductory statements. It is the neuron. The neuron is the basic unit in the nervous system. Then the next question says, draw label diagrams to illustrate the general structure of a neuron. And there we have a motor neuron, as you can see. Now notice, when you're looking at a neuron, there are three main parts that you have to identify. There are structures that bring impulses into the nerve or neuron, nerve cell, and structures that go out. Those structures that go in, there's a direction there, are known as the dendrites. And in this case, you can see many dendrites. Where do they take the message? They take to that part which looks like a cell. And we call that the cell body. Remember, a cell, any cell, must have a nucleus. Any cell can also have a cell membrane. So there's the cell membrane. And any cell will have cytoplasm. So these labels are from your general knowledge of cells. You can label them. In here, we also have Nissl granules and neurofibrils, etc. Then you'll notice something is going out there, a part that's going out there. This whole part here is called an axon. There's your label there, axon. So again, cell body, axon, dendrite. Dendrite takes impulses to the cell body. And axon, A for away, takes impulses away from the cell body in that direction. So when you're drawing a nerve cell or a neuron, you must show the direction of the impulse. Important to do. Now these structures, the dendrites and the axons, are very delicate structures. Remember, these are microscopic structures. We cannot see them with the naked eye. So they're very small structures, and they can be easily damaged. So therefore, they must be protected. And what do we have there? We have a sheath known as the myelin sheath that covers and protects the axons and the dendrite. Not only does the myelin sheath cover and protect it, it also gives electrical insulation. What the hell does that mean? You know, at your house you got a hairdryer, you have stove, you have a heater, etc. And you have to plug that in. There's not bare wires hanging around everywhere. There's some insulation around those wires. They have some plastic or other insulation. Why? So that you won't get shocked. Now, the impulses that travel in our body are also of electrical nature. And what can happen, if they're not insulated, the impulse, instead of going from point A to point B, it can get lost along the way. So it means it's not insulated and it's going to go out of the system. And that's not good for us. Okay? So the myelin sheath helps that. So in that way, it also speeds up the way the impulse moves. At intervals on the myelin sheath, we have something that looks like this. So those little gaps are called the nodes of Ranvier. And most neurons, or all neurons, will have an end plate where it ends either in a synapse or in an effector in this case, and you move on. So this is a a diagram to show a motor neuron. Just to show you how the myelin sheath is arranged, this diagram here is showing you how the myelin sheath is arranged to cover, insulate, and protect the delicate axons and the delicate dendrites. That's what we're having there. So if they ask you to draw a generalized, you can draw any one of them, but we drew a motor neuron in our discussion today. We still with question 1. It says, illustrate the differences between neurons based on their structure. Very careful you must be when you are looking at the question. This one is saying based on their structure. We can also ask for based on their functions, so you must be careful there. And the 3 types of neurons are unipolar neurons, bipolar neuron, and multipolar neurons. I'm starting with this one, unipolar. The unipolar neuron has only one process leaving the cell body. If I draw it for you this way, this is what it will look like. Cell body. So it's the same process that's going through. So we say it's unipolar. A bipolar, you can see there's the cell body here and 2 separate structures on either side. So it's a bipolar neuron. And a multipolar neuron, like the one we've done, the motor neuron, you see there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 structures leaving the cell body. So many structures leaving the cell body becomes a multipolar neuron. The next question. Distinguish between the different neurons based on their functions. So the first one was on a structure, bipolar, multipolar. Now we're looking at neurons based on their functions. First one, would be the sensory neuron. Okay? What does the sensory neuron do? It transfers impulses from the receptors to the central nervous system. This from-to relationship you must mention when you're talking about the functions of any neuron, because it's taking impulse from somewhere to somewhere. You'll notice in the discussion here as we're going to carry on now. The next one is the motor neuron. And the motor neuron transfers impulses again from the central nervous system to the effector. Notice the from-to effect again. And next is the interneuron or relay neuron, and some textbooks even call it the connector neuron. And what does it do? It transfers impulses from the sensory to the motor. So, the first one, sensory, from the receptor to the central nervous system. Second one was motor neuron, from the central nervous system to an effector. And the last one, inter-relay connector neuron, transfers impulses from the sensory to the motor neuron. And guys, with that, I think you earned yourself a break. I hand you over to Luni.
All right, guys, we are going to take a very short break, but keep asking all the questions. During the break, I will make sure that I ask Aslam, and then we'll go through the questions, and I'll comment, and I'll answer you guys. So go take a break, go drink some water, grab some juice, just refresh yourselves, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back, Mindsetters. I hope you guys enjoyed that very short break. We have a question from Nosi Pomkize Aslam. She's asking, what's the meaning of input and output in this session?
Good question. Nosipa wants to know what do we mean by input and output in terms of what we've been talking about. We're going to have to go back a few slides. And we go back to our first slide here, not the first slide anyway, but our first in our theory. Input and output would obviously be referring to, rest of you mindsetters, yes, input would be referring to the stimulus. The stimulus is the input, is what you're getting in, is the stimulus. What is a stimulus, by the way? A stimulus is any change in the internal or external environment. For example, I stop talking now. Now I start talking. So there was no noise. Now I start talking. It's a change. So Loon is hearing me speak, and you out there are also hearing me. I move my hand, now I put it away, now I take it up again. So there's a change in the environment. I'm not hungry, and all of a sudden I feel hungry. That's an internal stimulus. I didn't have pain, now I have pain. That's an internal stimulus. So that's the input. This input is then converted to an impulse. Okay, so that's a stimulus that is converted to an impulse by what? By the receptor. So the job of the receptor is to convert a stimulus to an impulse. I'm actually glad this question came up. It helps us to elaborate on the definitions. Thereafter, the impulse travels to the central nervous system by means of sensory neurons, because the job of a sensory neuron is to take impulses from the receptor to the central nervous system. So the control center now receives this input. And when it receives this input in the form of an impulse now, it then takes a decision and sends messages, impulses back to different parts of the body by way of a motor neuron. Coming there, motor output, to an effector. And when this effector responds, that is the output. So in other words, in my earlier example, I said that you smelled the food. The smell of the food was the input. And that was converted to an impulse, and it went to the brain. The brain is a control center. It sends a message to the salivary glands. Hello, there's lack of food coming your way. So what happens? To prepare for food coming into your mouth, the salivary glands already secrete saliva. That's the output. That is the output. The output is the response. So the input is the stimulus, and the output is the response that you're going to get. Okay, I'm hoping, Nosipo, that helps you. We then move on to where we were earlier, and that is with that area there where we spoke about the difference between sensory, motor, and inter. Now, we must also understand, as we're talking about this, that the nerves, when we say sensory neuron takes the message to the central nervous system, we don't mean that there's one long sensory neuron from your toe right up to the brain or spinal cord. No. It would be a series of sensory neurons that are going to work in a interchanging of information. And the beauty of this connection is that the two neurons, the axon of one and the dendrite of the other, they don't actually touch. So there's not a continuous wired system. There's an area between the axon of the one and the dendrite of the next one, which we call the synaptic knob. And that's in this area here. And there's a space between the axon and the dendrite. This space is called a synapse. And there are chemical substances in the space here. This is what you see where the white dots are. There's chemical substances that take the impulse from the axon of the one to the dendrite of the other. And if you know your grade 10 work, you would know that these fellows are mitochondria. And the function of mitochondria is to supply energy. So you can see there's lots of mitochondria there. They're going to supply the energy for this transfer. The neurotransmitters, as we call these chemical substances, you do not have to know the exact name of the neurotransmitters. You say the neurotransmitters take the message across the synapse. Firstly, you must know that the synapse is a functional gap between two neurons. Definition. Secondly, we need to know that the message, the impulse, moves from the axon of the one to the dendrite of the other by means of chemical messengers or chemical transmitter substances known as neurotransmitters. That's it. That's what you need to know. Obviously, guys, if you're going to go further into physiology, you're going to actually learn how these messages work, how these neurotransmitters operate. But for our curriculum, that's way out of our depth. So we keep to what we are doing. Okay? So that's the next thing. That was the basis of the nervous system that we've covered now. We now move on to the central nervous system. And in this fantastic journey, Looney, that we're going through, our first stop is the brain.
All right.
Wow. Isn't that a good stop?
Awesome.
There we go. And guys, you lucky. When we were in school, we had to learn much more of the brain that you are learning today. You only have to learn 4 parts, and we're going to restrict our discussion to those 4 parts only. There's much more stuff in the brain that you can look at and you can learn in your time, but for our space, we're looking at these 4 areas. The largest part of the brain, as you can see here, drawn in blue, colored in blue as such, is the cerebrum. This part here, the cerebrum. What does it do? It controls all voluntary actions. As we spoke about earlier, what are voluntary actions? Those things that you can control. Like my talking. Some people say, I can't control my talking. I don't know if that's true, Luni. What do you think?
No,
I can
I'm
stop.
sure you can.
Ah, yeah. You don't know me, that's why. Eh? If you ask James and John, they'll tell you, I can talk for hours and I won't stop. And you ask my pupils in class. James is he's confirming that with me as well. Right? So it controls your voluntary actions. That's the first thing. Then it is a center of intelligence, memory, speech, and consciousness. So all higher thought processes, memory, the fact that you can remember things from before, intelligence, whichever way we define intelligence, some speech, and your consciousness and your judgment, the fact that we can take rational judgment, all that is concerned with the cerebrum. Also, with the cerebrum, we also have the sensations. All the sensations, the vision, the smell, the touch, the taste, the hearing, all those senses, we talk of the 5 senses, they are perceived in the cerebrum. So you can see, it's not big for nothing, the cerebrum. It has a lot of work to do. By the way, just off the track, the cerebrum is made up of 2 hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere of the cerebrum controls the right side of the body, and the right part of the cerebrum controls the left-hand side of the body. Okay? So if you are using your right-hand side of the body, that means you have developed your left hemisphere of your cerebrum more. You'll notice people that play football and sport, those that can use both limbs equally well are the more crafty ones, the more skillful players are those that can, for example, in soccer, kick equally well with both feet, because as a defender, you're looking at them, you don't know which leg they're going to use next, so it's very difficult to mark them as such. Same with netball. If the person can push the ball around with both hands, they're going to mess with you, you don't know what's going to happen next. So those people have developed both sides of the brain to a certain level. I'm in one of those fortunate positions. I use my right hand to write, and I kick with my left leg. If I play soccer or anything, if I'm kicking a stone or whatever, my left leg is stronger. So that's a little bit of mixed dominance that we can talk about there. We're not going to go into the details of that. Just below that, right at the back, we have this area here known as the cerebellum. Please be very careful that you do not confuse the cerebrum with the cerebellum. The cerebellum at the back, at the base, below the cerebrum, its function is to regulate equilibrium, balance and equilibrium, the fact that we can stand straight up, etc., balance and equilibrium. It also controls muscle tone. Muscle tone, what is that? It's the healthy condition of your muscles. It also helps posture, obviously, because balance and equilibrium, fine movements, and coordination of voluntary muscle function. Now, there's a confusion there. We said the cerebrum controls voluntary action. Now I'm saying the cerebellum, but notice the word we're using. We're not saying control here. We say coordination. The fact that I can talk to you, cerebrum. The fact that I'm not, would you understand what I'm saying, Luni?
No.
No, but now you can, yes?
Yes.
The fact that I can talk in a coordinated manner, cerebellum. The fact that I can talk, cerebrum. The fact that my speech is coherent, cerebellum. The same, and I'm not going to try it here, to throw this pen up, because if the pen falls down and gets damaged, I'm in big trouble, right? I can't carry on. So if I had to throw this thing up, and then watch it and catch it again. The fact that I can throw it, cerebrum. The fact that I'm watching it, hand-eye coordination, I grab it again, cerebellum. Okay? That's where the cerebellum comes into play there. Then we have the hypothalamus in this area here, around there, and its job, first of all, it is thought to control the pituitary gland. It controls the pituitary gland, and remember, when we come to endocrine system, we will look at the pituitary gland in more detail. It also regulates hunger, thirst, appetite, and emotion. And if you did your grade 11 properly, it also controls water balance in the body. It controls the amount of water that you have in your body. So the hypothalamus, where's the hypothalamus? Around this area here. So it's a control of the pituitary gland, hunger, thirst, appetite, emotions. So next time you're feeling sad, it's your hypothalamus. It's not your heart.
Actually, someone asked what emotions are caused by.
Emotions are controlled by the hypothalamus. Your crying, your joy, etc., all controlled by the hypothalamus.
So are they voluntary or involuntary?
Involuntary.
All right.
Okay. And we go further to the medulla oblongata. By the way, watch this line here. This line's got nothing to do with this label. The label is for that guy there. Please watch that carefully. This line here is the medulla oblongata. There we go, just below the pons varoli. This is the pons varoli. Below that, this area is the medulla oblongata. If they have two labels, like this one has, that will be the medulla oblongata, and anything lower would be the spinal cord. That's the third one that we have to, the fourth label that we look at. Okay, so in the medulla oblongata, we have balance, coordination, a regulation of automatic responses such as swallowing, vomiting, coughing, sneezing, pacing of the heartbeat, blood pressure, and setting the rate and depth of breathing. First of all, you notice if you learn in grade 10 about the heart has cardiac muscle. It has the property, cardiac muscle has the property of automatism. That means it can contract and relax without a nerve supply. However, the rate at which your heart beats, that means whether it beats faster or slower, is controlled by the medulla oblongata. And the rate and depth at which you breathe is also controlled by the medulla oblongata. Also, the nerves impulses cross over in the medulla oblongata, and that is why the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, because crossing over of nerves takes place in the medulla oblongata. And because of its position, it links the spinal cord and the rest of the body to the brain and vice versa. Below that is the spinal cord, and we're going to look at the spinal cord a little later in terms of structure and functions. Just to give you another diagram to show you how the cerebrum is divided. The cerebrum has different lobes. That is the occipital lobe, that is the lobe at the back of your head. All right? The frontal lobe is here in the front, obviously. These ones on either side are the parietal lobes, and this one is the temporal lobe. Notice that each area is controlling certain things. This one, for example, vision. The temporal lobe, hearing. Other senses are controlled here by the parietal lobe. And memory, reasoning, personality, intelligence, etc. is controlled by the frontal lobe. So if we damage different lobes in the cerebrum, it's going to affect different parts of our body, as we will look at next week when we're talking about some of those problems. And with that, you've earned yourself another cookie break.
A cookie break. Guys, Aslam said you guys deserve a cookie break, so go get some cookies. And we'll be back straight after this break. Don't go anywhere, guys. Welcome back, Mindsetters. As Aslam said before the break, you deserve a cookie break. So I hope you guys got some cookies and some milk on the side. Right now, though, we are going to go back to the brain. I hope your brains are refreshed after that break. So Aslam,
Thanks,
do
Looney.
this.
Welcome back. I'm hoping you revitalize and re-energize and ready to roll with our last segment for today. And we're going to be moving and some good questions coming up as well. So we're going to pick your brains. Mind the pun on brains there today, guys. By the way, just a big shout out to Adil Budania today, Dr. Adil Budania, who turned 40 today, and he gave me a scrumptious meal before I came. So, and he forced me that if I don't say his name on TV, he's not going to give me food. And happy birthday, Adil.
Happy.
Good, thanks, Looney. We don't want to sing and get you all, you know, mushy, Adil. So we just keep it to that as well. Okay, we're moving on. Somebody asked a simple question there earlier. I see they're not asking the question, but everybody's talking about the tree of life, the tree of life. I see it came up quite a bit on the Facebook page. So we go back to the cerebellum. By the way, just to mention that the brain, firstly, is having gray matter on the outside and white matter on the inside. What this means is that the outside of the brain looks more grayish and the inside, the internal part, looks more whitish. Why is this so? Because the gray part is made up of more cell bodies, and cell bodies have nuclei, they have Nissl granules, they have neurofibrils that gives them a darker shade, whereas the white matter is more with the axons and the myelin sheath. And if you learnt your grade 10 work properly, you'd know that myelin sheath is made up of white fibrous connective tissue, and there you're getting your white color coming from there. Now, on that note, the cerebellum has a distinct pattern in which the white matter goes. And as you can see there, looking like branches of a tree inside the cerebellum, the white matter. And that is called the tree of life, or in Latin, arbor vitae. So if you see that word anywhere, arbor, A-B-O-R-V-I-T-A-E, arbor vitae, then you would know that they're talking of the tree of life. Nothing that you have to really learn about, but that's what they're talking about there, okay? And we went further with the perception and the rest of it. We're not going to doodle too long on that. We move on to the spinal cord. And when we look at the spinal cord, guys, this is what it would look like. All right? Outside in the gray, in the spinal cord is the white matter. This area here is the white matter. All there, white matter, white matter, white matter. And the inside, this that almost looks like a butterfly, or some people may say looks like the letter H, is the gray matter. So you have the white matter on the outside and the gray matter on the inside. You'll notice that around there are membranes. There would be 3 membranes actually surrounding the spinal cord and the brain. They are known as the meninges. All right, they're showing you 2 here, but there are 3 of them. Okay, the dura mater, the pia mater, and the arachnoid. Dura mater first, the arachnoid second, and the pia mater third. The functions of these membranes, because they surround these delicate structures, they are there for protection. You also know that your brain is found beneath your cranium, so it is protected by bone. Same with the spinal cord. It's inside the vertebral column, so it's protected by brain. And the brain and spinal fluid has fluid in it called cerebrospinal fluid. And the fluid also gives protection to the brain and spinal cord. So if you look at it, the brain and spinal cord have 3 measures of protection: bone, membranes or meninges, and fluid, cerebrospinal fluid. And there we have it there. Now the upper part of the spinal cord is called the dorsal part. And that's in biology, generally in life science. When we're looking at sections, the upper part is called dorsal and the bottom part is called ventral. Just like the front part would be called anterior and the back part would be called posterior. We are interested in dorsal and ventral here. Now notice that the gray matter has an extension going out there. We call that the dorsal root. And this brings impulses into the spinal cord. And we have a little swelling there. It's called the ganglion. Going out here, we have obviously, because it's at the bottom, the ventral root going out there. And in the middle of the gray matter is a little canal, which we call the central canal. And this central canal is where the cerebrospinal fluid flows. I'm not going to talk about the neurons here yet because we're going to be doing reflex action just now, and we'll talk more about the different nerves, the motor neuron, the connector neuron, and the sensory neuron. So we need to know here the meninges, white matter, gray matter, central canal with cerebrospinal fluid, dorsal horns, ventral horns, dorsal roots, ventral roots, and the ganglion there that we are talking about. So have a look at that diagram. Good? Now let's go. Let's list the functions of the spinal cord. What are the functions? Notice where the spinal cord is: below the brain, above the other parts of the body, or around other parts of the body. So obviously it will relay impulses to and from the brain. So it's a relay station between the body and the brain. Secondly, it is responsible for reflex actions. And you're going to ask, so Aslam, what is a reflex action? And that's where we're going to next. First of all, this diagram shows what a reflex action, but let's do some explanation before we go there. A reflex action is a quick, automatic response to a stimulus. For example, if I had to do that, you see, Looney's getting worried. We're going to have some woman abuse here in the studio. No, don't worry, I won't do that. You see, she got scared and she moved away automatically. She didn't have to think about it because she had to think about it. Oh, there comes Aslam's hand. Man. By the time she said that, her face would have been already meeting my fist already, isn't it? So she protected herself and she moved away. This is a reflex action. You're not thinking about it. It's a reflex. That's why the word comes reflex. It is inbound, innate. It's an innate reaction for protection. This is the purpose of a reflex action, is to protect us from further harm. And the classic example would be when you touch something that's hot. You touch, for example, Looney, if this was a hot plate, and if I had to touch it, I can't say, well, I think I'm touching, I'm feeling hot.
Oh, it's hot.
Oh, sorry. By that time, my fingers would have been burnt to the crust. And maybe Looney would have had a good smell and thought that it's a lekker T-bone steak, and she could have eaten my fingers up that way there. No, that's not what happens. The immediate you feel the heat, you move your hand away. The same if you tramp something and there's something sharp. You don't say, well, I think I'm getting pricked now. By that time, the thing would go right up your toe and you would have serious damage. So what happens is you jump away immediately, and this is what a reflex action is. And I thought I'd rather do it that way today to show you an example first so you understand what a reflex action is. Now, what is the difference between a reflex action and a reflex arc? While the reflex action, like it tells you, action, it's a verb, right? The actual act is the reflex action. That means the reaction or the response, the quick automatic response to a stimulus, that's a reflex action. The reflex arc, we just add a word to it and the rest of the definition stays. The pathway, or not a word, sorry, I would be lying to you. You're going to tell me you said a word, but you added 4. The pathway and impulse follows. The pathway and impulse follows. That's 5 words actually. Yeah? The pathway and impulse follows to bring about a quick automatic response to a stimulus. That's the reflex arc. If, for example, for me to go to Joburg, that is the actual verb. I'm going to Joburg. I'm driving to Joburg. But how am I going there? Which route am I following? I'm taking the M2 east, or I'm taking the M2 west, whichever way. The name of that route, the noun, reflex arc. Now, don't call M2 east and M2 west, Looney, tomorrow the reflex arc. Because, you know, the children, they'll write in an exam, Khan said so on TV. I'm giving you an example. That's what it means. They must be with us. They must be with us with this. So the reflex arc is actually the noun, the name of the pathway. The reflex action is the actual thing that happens to bring about an automatic response. And generally, the reflex action that we study involve the spinal cord. There are also some brain reflex actions that do take place as well. But without thinking, it's just there and a response immediately. What are the components of this? We need a receptor. We need sensory neuron. We need a part of the central nervous system. We need a connector neuron, we need a motor neuron, and we need an effector. Receptor, why? Because it must pick up the stimulus and convert to an impulse. The sensory neuron, why? Because it must take the message to the central nervous system. Interneuron, why? Because it must connect the sensory neurons to the motor neuron. The motor neuron, why? Because it must take the message from the central nervous system to the effector. Why do we need an effector? To bring about a response to the stimulus. Now, obviously, that response takes place in much faster a way than what I have just described. Let's look at this example here now and answer the questions. So I've done the explanation. Now we're looking at what happens. First of all, they're saying this is a reflex arc. Identify neuron labeled A. Neuron label A is the one in the gray matter between that neuron and this neuron. And that would be, obviously, the connector neuron or relay or interneuron. Name the type of neuron that is connected to structure B. Let's go back to the diagram. Structure B. What is structure B? Structure B is the effector, the muscle, the gland. And obviously, the thing that's connected to it would be the motor neuron. Explain the effect on the body if the neuron mentioned in question B, the motor neuron, is damaged. So if something happens and your motor neurons are damaged, what is the effect then? First of all, the person will become aware of the stimulus. You will be feeling the pain because your receptors are still working, your sensory neuron is still working, so you're feeling it. But the motor neuron will not be able to transmit the impulse to the from the interneuron to the effector, to the muscle or the gland. What to do? So the muscle and movement will not take place and the response will not occur. Now imagine your motor neuron is damaged and you're holding the hot plate. You're in big trouble because you can feel it and it's damn painful, but you can do nothing about it. You can't put your hands away because the motor neuron is not instructing this hand. Obviously, it's not going to happen like that forever because you can't think about it as well and move your hand away. But in that case, in that instant, you're going to get burnt further because you wouldn't react immediately. Explain the significance of the reflex action in humans. Obviously, it helps to protect the body. As I said earlier, the main function of a reflex action is to prevent further damage. Obviously, you're going to get some damage when you're touching a hot plate, or you putting your foot on broken glass, or you're sitting and Looney decides, let me play a prank on Aslam and put a chair for him, but put 2 pins at the bottom. So Aslam sits down, Wah! And he gets up. Reflex action. Reflex action. You ever played the game Looney where somebody told you, are you scared? Are you scared? And they, what did you do? What did you do? What did you do when I did that? What happened to you?
I blinked.
You blinked, yes. When we were young, and are you scared? Are you scared? And they clap their hands in front of you, but you blink. Why? It's a reflex action. You can't do anything about it. Your eyes are going to be blink. It's protection so that if something is flying towards your eye doesn't get damaged. How beautiful our body is. All these things were put into our body to react to this. Not like a computer. We can't say our body is like the computer. No, 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 no. Computer came later. The computer is like our body. The computer is modeled on the brain and how the brain works. Okay? So let's move on. So we're saying that use the reflex that's immediately available there. The main thing is this answer here. We're talking about there. Helps to protect by the body by reacting quickly, so to prevent further damage. Let's now look at a bit of a summary. There and there. A summary of what a reflex action does. Now look at this flow diagram. Again, it's put here to show you how to make a flow diagram of your work. Everything starts with a stimulus, right? There's the stimulus there. The stimulus is picked up by a receptor. The receptor converts it to an impulse and takes it to a sensory neuron. The sensory neuron goes to the spinal cord that is represents the central nervous system. That then takes that impulse to a interneuron first, there interneuron in the spinal cord, then a motor neuron, and that leaves the spinal cord as an impulse and goes to the effector to bring about a response. Now, 2012, November, guys, the essay was on the reflex action and how it protects the body. You had to use this flow chart and explain it. In an essay, you cannot just draw this. You will get 0 because they tell you no answer, no marks will be given for a flow chart. So they can scratch this whole thing out and say no flow charts required. So if they ask you in an essay, you must have this in your head and you must be able to explain it. Question 4. There we have the diagram again. Identify parts labeled C and E. We'll do it on the diagram there. That is the cerebellum. And E would be the medulla oblongata. Notice in this diagram, classic what I told you. Look at that label and look at this label. So the one on the top, the higher one, would be medulla oblongata. The one lower would be the spinal cord. Remember that always when you're labeling this diagram. That's the pituitary gland, and that's the cerebrum and the hypothalamus there. Write down the letter A to F of the part which controls body temperature. So they didn't ask you to name it. They said write down the letter. The letter, hypothalamus, and that would be part B. So your answer would be B here. And C, explain how the body would be affected if part A were to be damaged in an accident. Part A, the cerebrum. So what do you do in a question like this? And we're going to end with this question. First of all, what do you want? They're asking you for the functions in reverse. So if it's not there, no voluntary actions, no interpretation of sensations, no higher thought processes. It all depends, however, which part of the cerebrum is damaged. We're giving the general. So what they're asking you in a predict question like this, they're asking you the functions, but if it's not there, these functions will not take place. So keep that in mind every time you answer a question like that. Remember that all the time. Okay, guys, I think we've come to the end of a great interaction.
Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. Thank you to Macmillan for sponsoring the show. I had so much fun. Until next time, guys, we'll see you then. Welcome to all you grade 12 life science students. So now we're doing the nervous system with Aslam. I am Luni. How are you doing, Aslam?
I'm great, Luni. What's happening? What's happening here? I see you doing some exciting stuff before this.
It's crazy, but we had fun. So are you going to give us some fun today?
Yeah, always.
All right.
Always.
So guys, don't forget to hit us up on Twitter at LearnExtra, on Facebook, on facebook.com/LearnExtra. You guys can also check out the show notes, the schedules, and the videos of all the shows on learnextra.co.za/live. So with all that said, I'd like to thank Macmillan for sponsoring our great show, and I'll take it right to Aslam.
Thanks, Luni. Welcome, Mindsetters. I'm hoping you had a relaxed day today. You see, Workers' Day was for you and not for Luni and I. We've got to work today so that you can do well in your exams. And one day, obviously, and in the background, we got our friend James that's taking care of all the technical stuff and obviously telling us what to do on cue. There we go, guys. What we're doing today, and we spoke about it last week, we finished off last week with the plant hormones. We are now dealing with still coordination, still response to the environment, but now there's something beautiful. You're going to comment on it. That will be your response to that. Or if you're smelling beautiful food somewhere and you walk in, then what happens is your mouth waters. Luni, you heard the term mouth waters?
Oh, yes.
What does that really mean, Luni, in our terms?
When, like, you see something that's tasty or something that you really want, and then you start getting that thing that you craving.
There you go, you're getting a craving for it. And what it actually means is that your salivary glands are secreting saliva. Mouth watering, meaning that the salivary glands in this case are the effectors. Your nasal passage has olfactory cells that sense the smell And with the tongue, the taste is also there. Smell is a combination of taste and smell at the same time. That goes to the central nervous system. The central nervous system is sensing food. It interprets that as food and therefore sends a message to the salivary glands to secrete saliva. So the secretion of saliva would then be your response. So basically, for coordination to occur effectively, an organism must receive stimulus, convert that stimulus to an impulse, and send the impulse to a control center, that is a central nervous system in our case, for processing and interpretation, and then respond to the stimulus. Stimulus, impulse, control center, reflex arc does. And we want to look at the significance. Why does it happen? Why do we have this thing called the reflex action in our body? This is what we're looking at today, guys. So get geared up. I'm hoping you've got all your pens, your papers, your little notes, your textbooks, whatever you need to use. Keep it with you. Don't forget, Looney's reminded you of the Facebook page, etc. Please, please, please. The success of our shows depends on your questions coming through. So keep that coming. Now, what I tell my matrics at school is, if they spend so much of time in their work for the year in grade 12 as they spend thinking about their matric farewell, we would all have better results in the country. Unfortunately, when we get to matric, we only focus on this matric ball, matric dinner, and we forget that we got work. Now, what can happen is, if you don't focus on your work, you may end up having 2 or 3 or 4 matric balls, and you don't want that. You don't want every year the people seeing you at the same function. And when you have a matric farewell, then obviously, guys, you have to coordinate the event. You have a committee, people report to that committee, the committee members then will deploy different people. In the New South Africa, we have to use this word deploy, because we're hearing it all the time. We're deploying people this way and that way. So we deploy everybody, different thing. They have to feed back to us, and we take. Now we're going to the animals. And the first system that we encounter is the nervous system. There are 2 systems that are involved in response to environment in the human, and that is the nervous system and the endocrine system, or the chemical coordination system. We are looking at the first of those 2, and that is the nervous system. So what are we doing today? First of all, we want to know what is the unit of the nervous system and how does it look? What is its structure? Structure of the neuron. The basic unit of the nervous system is the neuron. Then we want to go and look at the types and structure and functions of the different types of neurons. So not only we want to know what the neuron is and what a general neuron should have, we also want to know how many types do we have and what are their functions. We then go further to say that we want to look at the location and functions of parts of the brain. Which parts of the brain? The cerebrum, the hypothalamus, the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata. Big words, guys, but you're going to get used to it. We also want to look at the structure and functions of the spinal cord. And then, if we look at the spinal cord, then we must also look at what is a reflex arc and what is a reflex action. And finally, we want to look at what a reflex action that way. Now, coordination, this is what it's all about. Let's look at this diagram. And this diagram does it very beautifully. This is why we put it up. First of all, we have a receptor in the body that's going to receive the stimulus from outside. That's our first point of entry there. In this case, they're using the eye as a sensory receptor. It's going to receive the stimulus and convert that stimulus. So we're getting a stimulus coming in, and that is converted to an impulse. That's your sensory input, and that will then go to the central nervous system. So you have a control center, you know. So the information goes to the control center. The control center receives the information and they go through this information, they integrate it into their system, and they interpret it, and they send message out to an effector, still with an impulse coming there, to bring about an action. So you've sensed something, and you have an output. The output is called a response. So here we're having the response. Notice how it happens again. Stimulus, receptor, impulse, central nervous system, effector, and you bring about the response. So you're seeing something beautiful, and you're appreciating it, and maybe because you see